Hey, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to lesson two, HUMINT report examples. Now, I say this probably at the start of every lesson, but this is pretty important. It's great to be able to find your sources, to run your sources, to gather information, to go in as much detail as possible and get as much detail as possible. But if you can't put it down in paper, or you can't, what do we say in the trade, disseminate it, then it could well be a waste of effort. You may be part of a bigger group. It may be that HUMINT handlers pass the information on to analysts, and then you have report writers and editors and all that sort of stuff. That's great. But they tend to be, in the commercial world, they tend to be very small groups. And it may be that the source handler is the analyst, is the report writer, does everything. And that's what commonly happens, unless you work for a big, say, an oil and gas organization, where they generally have the money to have bigger groups and more depth. So this is particularly important because it may be outside a human's particular skill sets, unless you work for an intelligence organization. You've had a lot of training, and you've had a lot of opportunities to work in different roles. So I'm going to go down, drill down a little bit in this because it is important, and it's also valuable. Um, Once again, my slides aren't moving forward. It's rather dismal. There we go. So the aim is to provide access to some tactical information, ground truths, and granular information on cultural issues, so reporting on cultural issues, local businesses, travel, structural challenges, conflicts. I mean, whatever your direction is from your employer or your client, you'll be reporting on. It could be anything from, like I've said in previous lessons, cell phone strength along a certain route, or the viability of a certain route to move goods along it, to anything from structural bridges. Can cars go across certain bridges, or is it only for foot tows? Local terrorist gangs, local criminal activities, tribal clashes. So all that on the list, and a whole lot more. I've had lots and lots of bizarre requirements. I've had one which was a worldwide tasking that was to find a piece of equipment, and that piece of equipment was so, let's see, confidential in nature that they couldn't tell me what it was. So I had to task someone to start looking for some piece of equipment at some point in the world that no one really knew what the equipment was, but the client desperately wanted the equipment back. So where do you start? You don't know what it looks like, you don't know what it is, you don't know what it does, you don't know what it is in the world. But sometimes, well, I mean, that's probably the biggest challenge I've had, but sometimes the direction is not clear. But this is the tail end of the intelligence cycle. This is the dissemination phase. So by the time you've gone through the whole process, you're hoping that the information you've gathered, you've analyzed, you've processed, you've put down into paper is exactly what the client wants. And this is an example of some of those reports. So looking at a lot of different types of reporting methods. Certainly up until, say, the early 2000s, it was usually text. But since then, mapping, the geograms, the different types of analytical programs that you get these days that can provide link analysis for a lot of these reports are great. And the type and the way we write reports uh, really does protect the source, because we don't mention the source in these reports. We don't say John Smith provided the source and all this information, and he lives at such and such. We write it in such a manner that it protects the source. We write it in such a manner that is very accurate, brief, and clear. And certainly it helps if it's quite sort of clipped and military, because that way there's very less ambiguity. And you support it with analysis based on all the different programs that you use, from mapping, heat mapping, and link analysis that you see here. Here's an example of a live report, so one that was actually provided to the client. So the source went out, gathered this information, the handler got it from the source. It was then written down in this format, and there's lots of things about this format. It's not classified in any way. It's not a military document or an intelligence department document. It's commercial, but it's written by professionals who were in the intelligence community. So I'll point out some of the main sort of points regarding this. It's source information. So this is pretty much what the source said and what the handler thought while they were going through the debrief. And this is where the interview techniques and the interview strategies comes in. It's up to you as the handler to get the information, to get the detail out. So reference points. Let's see. I mean, there's a classification, a commercial classification, source information. So that says, obviously, it should be handled properly, not for further dissemination without permission of the originator. The originator in this case was the handler. This is an SIR, source information notes. Reference document, the date. B2 is the source grading, and I'll go on to that in a couple of slides. And the distribution is restricted to there, as you said there, what that relates to the client. So local source reported the following general information on such and such an area. Comment, that's the handler comment. The information given is subject to confirmation of grid references and or specific local places of interest. About 30 minutes drive to the north of so-and-so and believed to be the area of interest. So there's one main paved road, crosses the area. Movement of the road is difficult, if not impossible, even in 4x4 vehicles. There are vehicle checkpoints on this road, as well as security for the oil field itself. The guards on the road are from the oil police. Handler comment. This may be a nickname. They are probably FPS, Facility Protection Services. So you can see how precise the language is. So everything that is mentioned is qualified to FPS, Facility Protection Service, but that's to be confirmed. Comment ends, so that's the comment handler, and then it goes back to the source's information. It's redacted. I redacted it because there's lots of detail in there. Even though this is not a contemporary document, it's still relating to a real location. So you can see that the type, what I'm trying to demonstrate is the type and the layout of the document. It's very precise. It's very accurate. It's not, I mean, it's all relating to facts. And if it's not facts, if it's thoughts or the handler's adding in extra detail, then he puts that in or she puts that in as comment and then comment ends. So here it's comment, source made a side comment that he was aware that due to the high level of payments being demanded by some tribes parties, some businesses have decided that smaller, less influenced tribes, businesses had decided that it was not viable to proceed. So that's a valid comment. It's not part of this overall text, but it was a valid comment, and the handlers added in. You can see how he did that. So that's an example of a source information report. Very military style, very intelligence sort of organization style. But that's what you should be looking for. And in that, I might consider adding, obviously, maps to say this is the area he's talking about, this is the road or the track the source was talking about, just to back that up. But that, to me, that's a good report. Another example, same layout, B2, source, observing low profile PSC, private security company, prior to an attack. Local source report that MM and SG, it shows up there. Some of the militia and special groups SG have now returned, withdrawing in accordance with the ceasefire declared by. And so it goes into a lot of detail. There's some groups heading back to where they shouldn't have been. Believe that MMSG were assessed to carry out attacks on routes it's too risky. So regular presence of MNF. Let's see, national forces. There you go. I had to dig back. However, they see Haifa Street, so I think that's in Baghdad. as a better, softer option are observing low-profile private security company movements attempting. So there's a lot of valid information on there. There's some very good, to my mind, there's some very good source information there in there about potential attacks, who's carrying them out, where they're planning carrying out, or where they're doing the reconnaissance. There's grids, the most favorable area, and they put grid references in there to make it very precise. You can see it's 10-figure grid references, I believe. So it's extremely precise, and also descriptions. Again, I might add that in and put in mapping to support this. And then it says how the attack's likely method of attack would be to deploy improvised explosive device in an attempt to halt a convoy using PKM, so machine guns. Believe the groups have ample supply of these weapons from Iran. There you go. I mean, there's lots of valid information on there, and that comes from a source. Now, I mentioned on the previous one and this one, B2, this is the NATO grading system pretty much. So B would be usually reliable and probably true. So that's based on the handler's assessment of the source. So that's why that's one of the reasons why the handler has to know the source very well, know the background of the source, so they can make an assessment on the source's reliability and also the reliability of the information. This is a common, it's usually called the NATO grading system, a common way of grading the reliability of the source and the information. Source contact notes. So after one of these meetings where the source has been debriefed, the handler would complete a source contact note, where it was done, when it was done, who it was done by, what the SSRs were produced. There might be more than one. What the level was. Case development. There's the force meeting with 1001, who was at ease and reported no problems in traveling to the meet. He appeared to understand what was expected of him. So that it goes into, it's a continuity of how the source was. What they talked about, what they were given, finances here, there we go. 1001 was paid a $150 retainer, was paid $100 for fuel, travel, and $70 for accommodation while in. Oh dear, sorry about this. He was told to restrict his travel and accommodate. So you can see this is an administration note to say what happened throughout the meeting, what tasking was given. He was told to look into certain things about tactics and procedures. This one's Afghanistan, so in the Taliban intent and tactics and procedures, and was given any training, welfare, usual inquiries to the family, all's well, security is aware of the need to maintain security. So you can see it drills down into some of the background administration, but this is a reference for the next meeting. So the handler would read through this to make sure that A, he's not getting overpaid, not getting greedy, but also how did he do? Because there may be months between these meetings, especially in Afghanistan, where sometimes you have to travel from one side of the country to the other, and it's not always easy. So you can see, and this is also of great value if a co-handler takes over, and we'll do more about co-handlers. But if the handler gets sick and someone else has to take over, that someone else will start reading through these source contact notes and have a good understanding of what the source has provided, why they provided it, what money's changed hands to pay for the administration and pay for the retainer, and also any welfare and security issues that they may have. So this is also a very valuable document, even though it's a sort of background administration document. This is a more of a commercial report. So out of all these meetings with the source and the sources, you would start to pull out information that would be commercially valuable. So you'd bring out lots of, you'd start to collect and collate lots of very detailed information that no one else would have. Very specific to industries, for instance, oil and gas, very specific to locations. Here is Iraq, but also maybe sort of in, say, southern Iraq in this instance. And this is another report. So this is more of a longer term report. Handlers probably wouldn't write this report. This is more of an analyst type of report, but they'll be based on, or at least supported by, the information that the source would be providing and the experience that the handler can bring to the table as well as far as comments. Another strategic report, this is a lot more specific. So the direction behind this would have been, we need to know who does what inside this oil and gas company. And you see it's been heavily redacted because it gives away a lot of detail. It tells you who does what, who the managers are, certain breakdowns in companies, who the manager is in that company, other organizational structures, and some other comments with it. And that's a typical source, commercial source operation. So lots of detail, and you would take that back to the client. The client say, that's great. Now we need to know more about this company or more about all these companies. Bring something like this back. You can see the date there. It's 10 years old now, but this is an example of a sort of family tree of a oil and gas company structure. And you can see the positions, and the redacted components are names that have been filled in, and you over time would start filling in these names, and you would be tasking the source to come back with the name of this one and this one and this one and so on and so on, until you have a full structure. And at certain points you'll be giving that back to the client saying, there you go, that's 1/3 complete, 2/3 complete, 100% complete. And that's a very valuable component of HUMINT. It's not just bombs and bullets and dangerous locations. It's also lots of commercial interest. Now, the structure document, most of it's redacted because it tells you, drills down into, in this instance, managing director, and it gives a brief, what we call pen picture. Deputy manager remarks considered to be corrupt and take bribes. Administration departments, more comments and details. Finance department, and the bottom remark, considered to be corrupt and blah blah blah, takes bribes. So there's lots of valuable information in there. Another more commercial level report based on all this information that's coming in from sources, but also the taskings. And you would start to, and this is more a sort of bombs and bullets and threats type document, but it's still very valid. And it gives a lot of background for certain areas and a lot of the risks in those areas. And that's a typical report in the commercial world. And other supporting documents, I mentioned mapping. This is typical of mapping as far as threats goes. This is the main threat areas, or these are the build-ups in IED attacks in Iraq, for instance. This one's, I think it's Baghdad, Tampa, yep. So it shows, you can see the dots there. We've seen these maps on previous lessons on different courses, but it's build-ups in attacks. So you've got their times, dates, and the types of attacks and the locations. So this would all support the documents as well, and breakdown of different areas within Baghdad, for instance, and the threat levels. So that traveling staff or staff traveling through or into those locations have an understanding of what security they need to build up. And again, this goes back to the first lesson, the HUMINT for security managers. It's all interlocked because all this information, certainly on the bombs and bullets sides, go to feed operations, and because they're very interested in knowing what the threat is, so they can build the model to better protect their intentions, and also so that they can carry out their business, which is the prime reason for a commercial entity in a place like this. So lots of different supporting capabilities for reports based on source information. Here, as you see, it's environmental interaction support instead of HUMINT. As I've said previously, some organizations don't like the word intelligence or human intelligence, so it's sometimes mentioned as environmental interaction. So the critical points of all these reports are the safety of the source, safety of the handler, safety of the company, i.e. the client, but also the company who's collecting the data. You need clear direction from the source, clear direction from the client, because with that you can provide a report that gives them the information they want to know. Quite often it'll just be a one-liner like, we need information on this oil company. And then you have to go back and ask questions, and it may be that the client just does not know really what they want. They just want information. And that means there'll be more backwards and forwards, changing tack with the source, so that the source can provide better information. So the client provides direction to you, you provide direction to the source comes back with information. If the direction isn't clear from either the client or from you as the handler, then obviously the information is not going to be as good as you want it to be. Source management, the welfare of the source, any training you need, and the limitation of exploitation. Sources sometimes really want to help out, so they'll come back with lots and lots and lots of information that may not be valid, may be very useful, may not be valid, and may take up a lot of their time. And it may actually increase the risk. So you've got to limit their exploitation sometimes and say, no, I'm just only interested in this, and give them the box to look in with the information requirements in it, and say, this is all you want. Just work within these boundaries. They have to understand strict standard operating procedures. So don't do this because it's too dangerous. We do not want you to do this. Okay, do not expose yourself to danger, and some of them will, and you won't want them to, because a dead source cannot provide information. A source that disappears cannot provide information, but you don't want them to get hurt anyway, because there's business continuity behind it, but there's also potentially some level of duty of care that you may have to consider. And it's a strict need to know. No one in your organization who does not need to know needs to know. No one source's friends need to know. Their family does not need to know. So you have to maintain a strict need to know. The source has to maintain a strict need to know. The client has to as well. And you've got to maintain a lot of flexibility. So you've got to build that in with any agreements with the client. You say, this is a potentially risky type of operation, using people on the ground to gather information, so you have to be flexible. I can't guarantee he will be back within 2 weeks with that information. He usually is back in 2 weeks, but I can't guarantee it. So you have to build in and manage their expectations. And reports have to be well written. So you've seen some examples. The style is usually well recognized and is well received. Military type style or intelligence type style, because they're accurate, they're brief, and they're very clear, and it explains each acronym, for instance, and any comments are heightened as comments, and it's otherwise factual. So they're usually very good, very pertinent documents. So that's it. Looking at reports can be rather dull. I hope this one's been a little bit more interesting, because they are live documents. They've been used in the past, and the information has been provided by sources, and it's gone through the handler process, the collation, the collection, the whole intelligence cycle process. These reports have gone through, and they've gone back to the client, and they've been well received by the clients, and the sources have done excellent jobs providing information to such a detail. So you can see on those examples the whole process of, there's been direction previously, the source has gone out and looked for the information, they've come back, they've reported the information, the handler's drilled down and asked the right questions and got the information, it's been collected, collated, analyzed, and then disseminated. So that's in one of those reports, you see the whole intelligence cycle. That's why, to me, they're very interesting. So I thank you for your time as always. Feel free to ask me any questions.